Hi, everyone. My name is Moncherie, and I am the administrative coordinator for PLATO. Thank you all for joining us this week for our roundtable. Our theme this week is how P4C can help students develop a comfort with failure. And we have a great facilitator, Laurie Grady, joining us today. Just a little bit of background on Laurie. Laurie has been teaching English for over 20 years in the Philadelphia area. She's committed to the instruction of critical and philosophical thinking and communication in all of the courses she teaches, including AP Language and Composition and Literature and Philosophy. Laurie also serves on Plato's Board of Directors, Media Committee, and Program Committee. She's passionate about communicating the potential of philosophical inquiry to other teachers and is dedicated to exploring practical ways of expanding philosophy into more schools, classrooms, and homes. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Laurie.
Thank you so much, Moncherie, for that introduction. And thank you very much for being here tonight. I know we have a small group, but I think that if we're all willing to participate, we could have a really great discussion. I do want to start off with some 3 things that are working against us this evening or this morning, wherever you happen to be. I am a little bit under the weather, so if I cough or anything like that, I hope you'll forgive me. I'm fighting a pretty bad cold. 2, Moncherie gave me that introduction, and I want to be very clear that I'm not an expert on this subject matter. I'm an armchair philosopher by night, and I'm a high school English teacher by day. So I'm not necessarily an expert in this field. I am a very experienced failure, though. As mentioned, I'm a high school teacher, so I experience failure pretty much daily, or at least I perceive it to be failures constantly throughout the day. I'm also a parent. I have a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, and I was just informed today that I failed in telling my daughter she needed to wear a certain color to school today. Failed, parent fail there, So I do have some experience with failure. And the third thing that's working against us tonight is the concept of failure itself. I believe it's just so vast and so diverse and so widespread. It's really impossible to examine comprehensively, especially in an hour's time. So due to these limitations, this presentation is bound to fail, right? Be that as it may, I'm confident that we can all walk away with some thoughts on how philosophy can help our children and us feel more comfortable with such a complex and often difficult fact of life. So because failure is so pervasive, humans have really grappled with this phenomenon since pretty much forever. I'll start with ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. He tried to rationalize failure by actually equating failure with success. And he seemed to believe that success was just as precarious as failure. He notoriously said that whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. But when you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. This makes us wonder which is more treacherous, success or failure. Fast forward to current day Silicon Valley, right, in the United States, where tech companies encourage their employees to fail hard, fail often, fail better. And like Lao Tzu, leadership coaching programs articulate failure as a potential opportunity. As a classroom teacher, my professional development sessions honor these mantras as well. They tell us it's okay to make mistakes because these mistakes ultimately lead to better instruction. In short, the absence of failure may also lead to the absence of growth, therefore, the treachery of success. This may be all well and good and even productive, but in our fast-paced, very digitally connected world, that's often tied to capitalistic ideals. Mantras like these are hardly helpful because the world is showing us something a little bit different. The world is showing us that failure can be permanent and it can often be irredeemable. If you just take a look or Google, the list of canceled celebrities and politicians in the past 5 years, you'll see that, sometimes they can't come back from that. And the ultimate truth, is that administrators do end up coming into my classroom with a rubric, and they will evaluate my lessons and tell me whether they were successful or failure. So all of that talk of, it's okay to fail is okay, but how much of it is actually true? And even in societies that are not capitalistic by definition, meritocracy has become a leading social ideal. That is the belief that merit rather than luck determines success or failure. And merit is often, just the word itself, is often synonymous with goodness or worthiness. So this ideal becomes problematic when an individual in such a society is consistently met with failure, right? Society will likely deem such an individual as an unworthy failure. And worse, the person will believe it. So talent and the capacity for determined effort, which we sometimes refer to as grit, often depend a great deal on one's privilege. Additionally, back to the big tech companies, these companies that espouse a fail hard, fail better philosophy in an effort to produce more innovative and ultimately profitable endeavors are the very monoliths that are developing products that force the rest of us to compare our own successes and failures to the appearance of others' successes and failures. Social media influencers, numbers of likes, amount of followers, all of these things equate success and worthiness to many people, mostly our younger community members. So when we lack the amount of likes and followers that we desire, we become failing losers. To be certain, those with more social media clout are not necessarily living the good life they appear to be, but in a world where everyone can feign success, experiencing failure is really hard to accept. So, my purpose here tonight is not necessarily to criticize any kind of capitalistic system, but more so to challenge the spiritual ramifications of measuring success and failure within these systems. When we focus more on the basic needs that capitalism can offer, and we measure success by our capital gains only, we often will unavoidably feel like we have failed. And worse, we feel like failures, something that we can't really come back from. So, in other words, if we want to live a good life, one of contentment, free from the fear of failure, how we often measure success is really just all wrong. And here's where I think philosophy can help. Certainly, we can lean directly on previous philosophical movements. I already mentioned Lao Tzu. Taoism can offer some direct contrast to the capitalistic lifestyle. And instead, we can focus on harmony and humility rather than fast-paced variance and pretentiousness. Buddhism also, as a philosophy, can be a path of practice and spiritual development, can guide us into better understanding, acceptance of failure and success. And Buddhist practices like meditation can certainly be a means of changing ourselves in order to develop the qualities of awareness and wisdom, and hopefully leading us to a more peaceful life. Even the cynics can teach us alternatives to our current trends of measuring success and failure. Cynicism rejects all conventional values of money and fame and power and reputation. The cynics have also a pretty good sense of humor, which I think can also help us through failure. They have one of the best comedians ever. They have Diogenes, who is a pretty funny character, if you know of him. And of course, as a teacher of literature, I fully endorse using literature as a stimulus for discussion of failure. The Greeks and Romans looked to drama, particularly tragedies, and these were written so that we could clearly see that even good people fail, and they can still be good. So I think those are really good stimuli to get us thinking about failure and putting it a little more in perspective. And we could probably point to several other schools of philosophy too, Stoicism, for instance, or absurdism. I mean, according to Camus, Sisyphus was the ultimate failure. He failed every day, but he was still happy. We could list several other tragic figures to look to as comfort as well. And looking at these schools and these books as models does offer some possible remedies to the uncomfortable feeling of failure. But I don't really expect individuals to give up all of their possessions or live in a barrel or watch the downfall of good individuals through fate. And of course, all of these things may be very helpful, but they're sometimes more reactive and not as proactive. So instead, I think a more modern and practical approach may be offered in a book that I recently read by philosopher Kiran Setia, which is called Life is Hard, How Philosophy Can Help Us Find Our Way. It's part self-help book, part philosophy, all good. And in it, Setia, who borrows from Aristotle, argues that we should concern ourselves more with atelic activities rather than telic activities. And just to define some of those terms, telos in Greek means purpose or goal. So telic goals can vary from extremely ambitious, like, say, making it onto an Olympic team or writing a novel, or to more common goals like making just a sports team or graduating from high school, getting a raise, just learning how to swim, something like that. The problem with telic activities, according to Aristotle, and then very well articulated by Setia, is that they have a final destination. So if you don't get there, you have objectively failed. But even if you do get there, your pleasure in succeeding is very short-lived. So Satya says that, quote, satisfaction is always in the future or in the past. So instead, he argues that we should strive for more atelic activities. We should find satisfaction in the processes that we are constantly engaged in. So, for instance, listening to music, there's no end goal in listening to beautiful music. You're listening and you're enjoying the process of listening. Taking a walk with no real end point. You just walk until you're done walking. And even if there is a clear end goal, for instance, if I want to serve dinner or build a table or even earn a PhD, we should, according to Setia and Aristotle, we should be just as concerned with the process of the cooking, of the building, of the engaging, and in the learning and mastering of the content. So Setia uses the movie Groundhog's Day. If anyone in here has ever seen Groundhog's Day, it's a great example of this way of thinking. If you haven't seen the film, I'll give you a quick summary. The protagonist's name is Phil Connors. He's a very cynical, egotistical weatherman. And what happens is he gets stuck reliving the same day over and over again. And at first, he uses this unfortunate loop to try to win over a woman. And he fails again and again and again in winning over this woman. So eventually he gives up that telic goal and he begins engaging in the atelic activities. He learns how to play an instrument. He learns a new language. He learns how to create ice sculptures. And throughout the movie, eventually he has no real reason to believe that he'll ever become unstuck from this loop. So therefore, Phil leans into the joy of the process with no real terminal end. He becomes more happy. He becomes relaxed, caring, friendly, and I would argue successful. So if we wanted to use this philosophy to instruct children to reframe their understanding of failure, perhaps we could help them be more sensitive to the processes that they are undertaking rather than the terminal goal of success. This can definitely be challenging, and I would love to talk about some of those options tonight. Perhaps some of you have some good advice on how to do that, because especially younger children, they usually need more concrete forms of measurement. But I do think that there are ways to sharpen their sensibilities and enjoy the process rather than the end product. So I think that this is a good place to open up the conversation. What I'm wondering is what your thoughts are on how we can instruct our children and ourselves to balance our acceptance of failure, especially within the context and challenges of our real or perceived societal expectations. I also am wondering if you think, using schools of philosophy and or literature as stimuli can be helpful, and what practical ways we could use them. And third, just ways to foster an appreciation of the process rather than the product. And how useful and realistic is that to use as a teaching model for our children? And of course, some of you may have come tonight with your own ideas on what this presentation might have been about and what we may have been talking about. And if you would love to open those up and talk about them, we'd love to hear that as well. So with that, is there anyone who wants to chime in?